It's been a summer with a lot of headlines around the Indigenous voice to Parliament, and there has been an increasing presence on the Conservative side of politics questioning whether there will be support for this. The Nationals declaring they won't support it, the Liberal Party perhaps inching towards that. This week will mark a so-called week of action for those who want this referendum to carry when it's held later this year. Joining me live is Dean Parkin, Director with From the Heart. Thanks very much for your time. So a week of action, it does come after an interesting summer. Do you feel like the campaign and discussion from your point of view was blown off course a bit?
Thanks for having me, Tom. Look, what we really want to do at this point in time, and particularly around this week of action and the launch of our community campaign this week, is take this conversation back to where it should be. The conversation around recognising Indigenous peoples in the Constitution through a voice and the idea of a referendum in the second half of this year is something for every single voting Australian. It's for communities across the country. And I think it's fair to say that the politicians and the commentators and the speculators have had a fair bit of a go more recently over summer. And of course, that's fine. And that's part of this campaign. But our focus now is bringing that conversation down from those places, because the kind of conversations that I'm experiencing and we're experiencing in communities across the country is very different to what you get in Canberra on a daily basis. So we're really excited to take the campaign back to where it should be, and that's with the people.
Are you conscious of wanting to avoid this being a politician-led debate, because that would not be likely lead to a positive outcome? Is that your sense in this?
Well, I think we go back to where this all started with the issuing of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples very deliberately issued it to the people of Australia and not the politicians or the government of the day. And ultimately, it was an enormous statement of faith and a statement of belief that the right people to really wrestle with this issue and to really come to a good conclusion is the people of Australia. So we're just continuing the tradition of where this whole debate around recognition and a voice came from. And it's well beyond time that we take it back to the community. And, you know, we're seeing lots of people that are obviously expressing support and they want to get involved and plugged into the campaign. There's also a bunch of people out there that are unsure. They're starting to hear about it and they just want to be able to be invited in and not necessarily made their minds up yet, but just want to be invited in and be included in the conversation.
One of the big issues we did see in the media over the past few weeks was obviously alcohol-fuelled violence, in particular in and around Alice Springs. And those at least sceptical of a voice were saying, well, how does a voice help that? What's your response? How would or could a voice help that situation?
Well, you only got to look at some of the people that signed the Uluru Statement from the Heart back in 2017, which said we need a voice and we need a voice now. Some of the signatories to that statement are the people that have been working on the front line in Alice Springs and other communities for a very long time. They have been speaking out for years, whether it's in Alice, whether it's other communities around the country. They've been identifying the changes that are needed, but their voices are being swept aside in favour of outsiders, politicians and bureaucrats and so forth. And so it's no surprise that when the people that are actually on the front line of these issues are saying we need a voice, because they're the ones we should be listening to first and foremost. That's what this is all about. It's about saying that those people that are working and living on the front line, they understand their issues better than anybody else from outside their communities. And the voice is just about giving them that structure so they can bring their experience to the policies and laws that, quite frankly, need a bit of work because they're not hitting the mark.
So, and when you talk about those on the front line and addressing this particular issue, you say, you know, they would get a bigger voice. Would that mean having a model where there would be a national voice, but also regional voices, 25 to 35 of them? Are they necessarily needed when we start to talk about these local issues?
Well, I think that's some further work to be done after the referendum. Clearly, this process that we are focused on right now is focusing in on that national voice. There are issues at a national level that affect all communities across the country. We see it time and time again when governments come in, new governments come in with a brand new sweeping idea. They overturn the existing status quo without any genuine consultation with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And I think you see sometimes the results of those decisions happening now. So Our focus is absolutely on that national voice. And of course, there'll be interest from other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples on the local and regional arrangements. But the thing that's missing right now is that national voice, and that's what this referendum is about.
But, and you know, going to the regional voices, that does go to this detail question, which, again, some merely sceptical, perhaps open-minded about the voice have asked, some cynics have asked it as well. But couldn't it be better to flesh that out? And if we did come in the next few months to a model where you would have a bit more detail and say, yes, there will be a local voice, when people say, how do we help in Alice Springs, your answer is, well, we have a local voice that covers that region and gets a more prominent say. Wouldn't that actually help your argument?
Well, I think, Tom, before we get to that point, we've got to be very, very clear with respect to this current issue of a referendum on Indigenous constitutional recognition through a voice. What is it that we're going to be asking the Australian people to do? What is it that when voters step into that polling booth on referendum day, what are they going to be asking to say yes or no to? And this is really clear. We're going to be asking very simply, should we recognise Indigenous peoples as the first peoples of this country, and should that be through a voice? It's a very simple yes or no question. People aren't going to be asked to vote on models. They're not going to be given a choice. They're not going to be asked to vote on details. As with how constitutions are changed in this country, we ask the people firstly to give their assent through the referendum on a point of principle, if you like, to say, yes, there should be a voice and yes, there should be recognition, and that the details of that will be finalised after the referendum. And it's important to note, Tom, that it's the job of the politicians after the referendum. It'll be to finish the job, not to start it. There's an incredible body of work around models and structures that has already been done. That'll be for them to finalise after the referendum.
What do you make in particular of those within the Liberal Party who are saying we need more detail or we can't support it? Do you feel like that's a genuine call for more detail, or is it a cynical one?
Well, I think when some people are asking for detail, and we've encountered this for quite some time now, let's be honest, very few people are going to sit there and read a 100-page policy document that details the Indigenous governance structures and the way that a voice might interact with the Parliament. What they're wanting to know is that this is going to make a practical change. Everybody, no matter whether you're for or against the referendum, everybody agrees that the status quo is insufficient for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And there's broad agreement as well that when we give Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people a real say over their affairs, we get better outcomes and we get better value for taxpayer spend. So I think if we can demonstrate and continue to demonstrate that the voice will indeed be about practical outcomes on the ground, that it's going to be about bringing fresh faces to the table and making sure that those voices are heard properly, that people will get comfort that this is something that will be of a great benefit to Australian society, that they can get on board with it, and that some of those more detailed questions have confidence that they'll absolutely be answered after the referendum.